This is SelfWork, and I'm Dr. Margaret Rutherford. At SelfWork, we'll discuss psychological and emotional issues common in today's world and what to do about them. I'm Dr. Margaret, and SelfWork is a podcast dedicated to you taking just a few minutes today for your own self-work. Hello and welcome back to SelfWork. Today we have a very special guest, Annaliese Lawton, who is the author of the new book, Welcome to the Jungle, which chronicles her journey through motherhood as she navigates her struggles with mental health and other life trials. We have actually something in common. She'd also had a parotidectomy, which we talk about here on this episode. But she's a small town mom whose literary journey began when a Facebook post on motherhood and mental health went viral. That post was actually translated into 7 different languages and got a huge number of shares and views and eventually landed her a book deal. So she takes us on a very real, stark, and what she calls unfiltered journey of self-discovery about motherhood, and as she faces many unexpected experiences and traumas. But hopefully she wants to encourage conversations about topics on maternal mental health, marriage, and wellness, which there's frankly just not enough information about. So I very much enjoyed Annaliese, and I hope you will too. This wraps up our February relationship episodes, and I hope you've enjoyed them. Before we go on, let's first hear from another great sponsor of SelfWork. What better time than now to decide that you're going to do something for yourself in 2023 that will only add to your sense of well-being, where you can begin every single day with an act of true self-care. Not a bubble bath, not even a therapy session, but by drinking one glass full of 75 high-quality minerals, vitamins, probiotics, adaptogens, and whole food source superfoods, which support everything from your gut to your immune system to your energy level. I use it every day and love this habit because if you're like me, self-care can get lost in a day full of kids, work, meals, and whatever else comes along. AG1 knows that people who listen to SelfWork are seeking to make their lives better. So Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 travel packs with your first purchase. Become your own green machine in the first hour you're up and around. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/selfwork. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/selfwork to take ownership of your health in 2023 and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. So let's get right to my conversation with Annaliese Lawton. I'm so excited for SelfWork listeners to be able to get to know Annaliese Lawton. She's the author of Welcome to the Jungle, which came out in September of 2022. And I'm delighted to have you on. You and I were just talking about the fact that we both had parotidectomies, which is kind of unusual. Yeah.
Yes, I know. It was because we were supposed to record back in December.
Yeah.
And then I got an email saying that you had to go in for surgery and that, there was a possibility of it impacting your speech. And I just this red flag went off and I was like, is it the parotid gland? And then I couldn't believe it. I've never met anyone else who has been through it.
Yeah. I was reading this morning about how, there's a lot of trepidation about possible facial paralysis or something like that. And often it doesn't happen for a great, many people, but it does happen for some.
Yeah.
So yeah. And we were just saying, I really came back pretty strong, but you said you had some complications?
Yeah, I found the recovery I almost found the recovery harder than my C-section recovery, to be completely honest. It was very painful. I don't know if it's because I had a 10-month-old and a just turned 2-year-old at home.
Yeah, I think that probably had something to do with it.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you came home. I'm sure you came home with a drain in your. Yeah, so my kids were yanking on my drain, and the drain ended up having to be left in like a week longer than it was supposed to. So it was a long and painful recovery.
No, my 28-year-old son was very careful, and
Oh,
he was
good.
very particular about making sure that, the wound was kept clean, and
Good.
he's an engineer. So he was like,
So my husband's an engineer, and he was obsessed with taking care of the drain. Like it was his responsibility. It was, yeah.
It must be an engineer kind of thing, that's something they can do.
Engineers are a rare breed of human, for sure. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you and I are both okay, and that there wasn't any malignancy, and that's what's really important.
Exactly.
And I'm so glad to be back on SelfWork.
Yeah.
I'm glad to have you as a guest. I enjoyed your book. I was thinking this morning, really, I think I read it with 3 different hats on.
Okay.
My hat as a mom,
Mm-hmm.
my hat as an author, and my hat as a psychologist.
Okay.
So, first of all, tell SelfWork listeners about who you are and how you began to write about this. And I was just looking at your Facebook page this morning too. So,
yeah.
So kind of tell us a little background about Annaliese.
For sure. And now that you've said that, I'm really interested to hear what your perspective is on the book from wearing those 3 hats. But yeah, so my background is actually in environmental management and sustainability. I used to work on permitting applications for roadways and oil pipelines and all kinds of crazy stuff that wasn't necessarily fulfilling and wasn't necessarily for someone who really loves nature and like finds their home and peace in nature. Being a part of the team that was like destroying that was a little bit hard for me.
Yes.
So I wasn't feeling totally fulfilled. And as part of those jobs, I did a lot of writing, but a lot of it was public memos and newspaper articles and that sort of stuff. It never really had a lot of heart in it. Mm-hmm. But writing was always something I loved. And when I got pregnant with my first son, we found out he had a soft marker for Down syndrome, and he also had fluid on his brain. We found this out 2 days after our 12-week ultrasound. So we went for our 12-week ultrasound, saw that our baby looked healthy, announced the pregnancy to everybody on Facebook, like people do. And 2 days later, got a phone call into my doctor's office saying that they found an abnormality with our baby. He had a soft marker for Down syndrome. We were sent for additional...
Okay, can you slow down when you say that again? Because I'm sure the listeners going, he had what?
Yeah. So he had something called a thickened nuchal translucency, which is on the back of his neck. And there are a few different markers that they look for in ultrasounds that could flag a trisomy. So I believe it's trisomy 13, 15, and 18 are what they're looking for at the 12-week ultrasound. And my son met the criteria for being within the risk category for that. We were sent then and transferred into care to a high-risk hospital with a high-risk OBGYN, where they did additional testing and found additional markers for conditions. We went through non-invasive and invasive screening. So everything from blood work to the amniocentesis. We didn't find out until 28 weeks pregnant that our son was healthy and everything was going to be okay.
Right.
But during that period, between when we had announced our pregnancy and the weeks where we believed we were going to lose our son or have a non-viable pregnancy, I didn't know how to be a person who looked pregnant while dealing with all of this trauma and complications going on internally.
Oh, sure. I'm going to put a trigger warning on this really quickly for any of you who are listening that have had this happen or have had problems with miscarriage or whatever. Please be careful listening to this. Anyway, but who've had problems that have either been ended in tragedy. So, and very, very difficult traumatic circumstances for them.
Yes.
So, we don't talk about that too much.
No.
We don't talk about the problems with either trying to get pregnant and then losing pregnancies or then problems with babies. We tend to focus on the good stuff. And so I'm sure it was a very difficult, complicated do you celebrate? Do you, what do you do? And so you've got a lot of grieving, but you don't know. I mean, it's just tough.
Yeah, it was probably one of the worst times of my life. I was 27 years old, and my husband and I kind of we felt differently about what we would do in a circumstance, depending on the diagnosis. My husband, as I mentioned, is an engineer, so he's very based in statistics, very much about science, very much listening to what the doctors are saying and wanting to take the recommendations and look at it through that science lens, where I am the mother. I am carrying this baby. I am the one who has to make the final decision on whether or not what the outcome is. You know what I mean? So there was that divide in my marriage, along with there being a divide with friends and family who had never been through something like this before. And it being a very isolating and traumatizing time as a mom. So what I decided to do during that time was write a Facebook post to kind of let everybody know what we were going through. And that Facebook post turned into a blog, and that some of my writing eventually ended up on the Huffington Post. And I kind of just kept doing it because of the feedback from people saying, you know what, people don't talk about this stuff enough. And I was meeting people from all over the world who had been through things that I had been through, and it was validating and reassuring, and it took away that feeling of isolation.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's one of the best kind of stories about social media that you hear sometimes. You have to kind of raise a bit of a question about what real effect it's having, but this is a good effect where people feel connected. Exactly.
And I should note that I did have to unfollow friends who were having healthy pregnancies. I couldn't, it sounds selfish, but I couldn't watch other people enjoy a happy pregnancy, a happy, fulfilling pregnancy. And all three of my pregnancies ended up being complicated. So now it doesn't bother me, but for the first one, I was like, I'm 27. I'm not drinking coffee. I'm not having sushi. I'm following everything to a T. Like, I am the best candidate for a healthy pregnancy. Why is this happening to me?
Yes.
And then through work, I changed my way of thinking and was able to cope through the future pregnancies. But for the first one, it was very difficult.
You know, what in reading the book, what I noted, was just how transparent you were with your emotions. And you say balance is bullshit a couple of times in the book. And you talk about having these struggles with pregnancies and just having 3 children in a very short period of time, and being a stay-at-home mom, and the difficulty of that, and the sloppy, chaotic, life that you're living.
Yeah.
And wanting to validate that and wanting to talk about that, and at the same time say, but I love being a mom.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember when I was writing about empty nest, some of my friends would contact me and say, Margaret, are you okay? I mean, I'm talking about this, these terrible things. And I was just trying to say, well, I just want to try to reach people that might be feeling this. But I also have my days that I'm just fine.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Definitely. And I think that you can love motherhood and find it to be chaotic and hard and trying and tiring all at the same time. And I think that is and you can validate this, but I think that's normal.
Oh yeah. And I love that you said, and it can be this, and it can be that. It's not a but. It's an and. It's it can be full of anxiety and full of confusion and, all this kind of things. And it's hard on your marriage. Lots of studies show that with every child that's born, marriage satisfaction goes down. So, that's just part of it. So what was it like? What has it been like since the book was published for you? What are you experiencing? What do you think about the book? Just tell us a little bit about how it felt to write it and now have it being published?
Yeah, I don't know what to call it, if it's like oversharing fatigue or just reliving the trauma fatigue. I actually, I went through the process of writing the book. I cried a lot while writing the book. The book came out. It hit #1 bestseller on Amazon its first weekend. The feedback from people who have read it is incredible and so touching. But then I completely stepped away from social media and hibernated for 2 months, which is not ideal when you're trying to sell copies of a book. But I just felt like as someone who has published bits and pieces of my story on the internet, I have now put something out there that I absolutely cannot take back. And my biggest concern, and I actually had a child psychotherapist read my book before it was published, was what my children would think when they were reading this, because I never want them to think that it's their fault. I want them to know how loved and celebrated they are. But I also want them to know that when they're parents and they are feeling these sorts of things, mom gets it. And I also hope I never forget what I went through, because I think so many of us look back on life through rose-colored glasses, and I'm already doing that now that my oldest is 6. And I already find myself at the grocery store looking at new moms being like, oh my gosh, just savor the moment, enjoy it. But they're so tired, and I don't want to forget what I went through and contribute to that ongoing conversation that motherhood should be the best time of your life, because it's okay if it's not. Yes,
and there's so much shame about, you say there's shame about not loving every moment, and also you quote that 80% of millennial moms will report they feel like they need to be perfect. And I've done a good deal of research on perfectionism and talk a lot about perfectionism. And I was not surprised by that percentage. It's probably very sadly true. One would think that in this day and age, we would forgive ourselves and realize you can't be perfect, but it's that sense of responsibility for so many moms is very strong. And I love this other quote. In fact, I wanted you to explain this a little bit more. I think it's my favorite quote of the book. You say, motherhood isn't what made you lose your identity. You lost it long before.
Yes.
So can you talk about that a little bit? Because that sounds like quite a journey.
Yeah. So this is my perspective, and this is just through some of the work that I've done. But when I was floundering in the early parts of motherhood and feeling like I was failing through whether it was not being able to breastfeed or not having a perfect home or feeling frustrated or my insecurities with my body, all of that sort of stuff. And then when I got diagnosed with that parotid gland tumor, mine was actually wrapped around my facial nerves. So the risk of facial paralysis was quite high. And I said to myself, if I'm going to lose my face, which is really the only remaining piece of my identity that I feel like I have left, I have to figure out who I am on the inside, and I have to heal those insecurities, or I am not going to survive. Because at this point, I was so deeply depressed from a mix of postpartum depression and just mental health issues I've probably struggled with for a greater part of my life.
You didn't have the easiest of childhoods, that's for sure.
Yeah. So I started looking back over my life, and I saw, okay, when I was 13, I was bullied, and I didn't fit in with the popular kids, and I didn't feel pretty enough. And, I wanted to change myself to be a part of that group of kids, right? So I went and changed my clothes. I went and changed my hair. I gave away pieces of myself and then plopped pieces of other people inside of me, right? So, as a young girl, you go through life with these insecurities from media and your peers and all of these expectations that you place on yourself and society places on yourself. So that happened when I was around 13, and I struggled with my self-esteem as a young woman. And then, you know, I met a boy, I fell in love, I lost my virginity, not necessarily because I was ready, but because I thought it was expected of me when you are 18 years old and you've been in a relationship for a certain period of time. So again, gave away a piece of myself, put a piece of someone else in there, and stayed in that unhealthy relationship for 4 years because I believed my virginity was such an important component of who I was. Because again, as a female and as a young girl, you are told how important your virginity is. There's no other conversations that really come into play about what to do after you lose your virginity.
Not in a lot of households, no. That's true.
Especially I was raised Roman Catholic, so not having sex you're not supposed to have sex until you got married. So I made a decision at 18. I think I want to marry this boy. I love him, and so that happened. I also grew up watching shows like The Swan, and I don't know if you've ever seen The Swan, but they would take these women, give them free plastic surgery.
Oh, that's right. I remember this show.
Make them beautiful. So that was a show I grew up with. I grew up with Girls Gone Wild. I grew up with, you know, Sex and the City, where, you know, thanks to feminism, females were allowed to be more sexual in media, but it wasn't for women. It was for pleasing men. So, you know, that's why I feel like you get to motherhood, you are in maybe a career that your parents pushed you towards, or a career that you think will bring you success, or a career that's not necessarily your passion. You're this mumble jumble of other people's expectations and personalities, and then you become a mom and you see life in its absolute purest form and through the most innocent lens. And you want to do better for your kids than what you had. You don't want them to grow up with the insecurities that you feel. And I feel like it truly shined this light through all of the holes that I had within me. And
another quote that I actually also love is, being a mom is an integral part of my story, but childhood is the most important part of theirs.
Yes.
I thought that was a really lovely sentiment.
Thank you. Yeah. So I feel like when I had my kids, they shined this light through all of my holes and made me realize that I needed to fill those holes back up with pieces of me and be true and authentic to who I was in order to be the best version of myself, the happiest version of myself, and raise them to hopefully do the same thing. And I know that they're going to lose pieces of themselves in life. That's the only way that we grow. But the goal is to find your way back eventually without getting too damaged in the process, right? Yeah.
You know, I said I'm kind of more 3 different hats. As a psychologist, I was surprised with the amount of depression and the amount of anxiety and the hyperfixation that you talk about, which actually could be a part of attention deficit.
I just got diagnosed with that.
Yeah. I mean, it's very much a part. People think, people with ADD can't focus at all, but they also have this typically very, you know, it's a very common thing that they hyperfixate on something. Yeah. As soon as I saw that word, I thought, I wonder if she's got ADD.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. So, you know, again, I don't really know how to address this. I think I grew up in a household where I was celebrated for being this like bubbly, happy little girl. And then when I started struggling, it wasn't necessarily because of my mental health, but because of what other people were doing to me. I was actually prescribed Prozac in my first year of university because I was having such a hard time. And I remember thinking, Prozac, like that's for crazy people. Like I you know, the way that Prozac and medication had been presented
to you
to me was that it was for very serious conditions. And I was just sad. Like I missed home. I had been bullied. Like I tried to justify all of this. And then when I had my babies and literally wanted to commit suicide while I was pregnant, I thought there's something going on here. Like I looked at Kate Spade and I wondered, what is that line that gets crossed? Will I be in control? Because I am losing control. And will I be able to stop myself? And that's when I started therapy. That's when I started medication. That's when I started to really focus on getting myself better.
So you did seek, I must have missed that in the book. I didn't realize that you'd actually gone into therapy.
Yes.
Okay.
I had started therapy. Yeah. Okay. I've been in and out. I could probably do therapy a little bit more. But, I have 3 kids. My oldest also has ADHD and special needs. So I do a lot of parent coaching therapy and therapy for my son. So my therapy, unfortunately, has taken a bit of a back seat. But
I get that.
Yeah.
So how did you, it's interesting on social media. I think that people who are trying to stay away from looking perfect on social media can sometimes become the perfect, non-perfect person. They can feel like, I've got to put all the ugliness out there. I've got to put all the messiness, all the chaos. Did you ever feel like that was a pressure, or did you feel like, no, I'm just going to stay away from that whole perfectionism stuff?
Yeah, I ended up growing on Facebook to 20,000 followers in a very short period of time. And a lot of that was with my words and not really the photos that accompany that are kind of spontaneous and stuff like that.
Sure.
My Instagram growth has been a lot slower because I don't have a perfectly curated feed. I really don't know. I wake up most days, my hair's in a ponytail. I got my sweats on. My house is a mess. And while a lot of other people live that way, sometimes I share that, sometimes I don't. I only post stuff that I feel called to share. I try not to put too much pressure on myself.
Okay. I just kind of wondered. Let me see what else. You also say that you had been diagnosed with PCOS.
Yes.
So can you talk about that a little bit?
I was diagnosed with PCOS and told that getting pregnant would be a challenge for me based on the state of my ovaries. And that was another difficult thing that I struggled with is when my husband and I decided we wanted to have babies, we went to my doctor and we were told, try to conceive for about 6 months. And when it doesn't work, because it likely won't, we'll refer you to a fertility specialist after 6 months of trying. And
then you got pregnant really quickly, right?
And I got pregnant right away. And then I got pregnant 8 months postpartum again. So it was kind of this, not only did I feel very blessed for my circumstances, I felt very guilty about being scared for being pregnant so quickly. I felt like it was too good to be true. Like there were just so many emotions that I was going through. And again, I really could have used therapy during that time. It wasn't something that was front of mind for me. And I don't know if you find that it takes a lot of other women time to come and seek support, but for me, it wasn't until I hit rock bottom that I felt like I really needed help.
Well, I think a lot of people are like that. And, especially people who have been taught that you just don't talk about that kind of thing. You solve your own problems and you wouldn't open up and be vulnerable. And
yeah.
So to wrap up, I wanted to ask you what are the things that you think you've learned most from writing the book, from being as transparent as you have? What would you go back and tell yourself when you were pregnant with that first baby? Or, what have you learned? What perspective? You use perspective a lot. You talk about gaining perspective.
Yeah.
What is your perspective now?
I have a few different perspectives. I think one, mental health is still uncomfortable for people to talk about. Even within my own circle of friends, I am the friend who overshares and talks about it all. And I still have friends who have struggled in silence for a while. and not talked about how they're feeling because it's just not something that they're comfortable with. I think it's okay not to feel comfortable talking about these things, but that doesn't mean that you should keep it inside and not seek the help. So I think mental health is still stigmatized. I think mental health is still uncomfortable to talk about. And that's one thing I hope in continuing to have these conversations will help kind of drive some change there. If I could go back and talk to myself when I was first pregnant, I mean, I think whatever I would say to myself, I wouldn't listen, unfortunately. And I think that's because you don't have perspective until you've been through it. So, however, I think for any mom who is struggling with a high risk pregnancy, struggling with shock from simply being pregnant, because that can be kind of jarring as well. Any mom who is struggling with their mental health or depression or perinatal depression was something I struggled with a lot as well. It's not just seeking help with a professional. It's finding a group of people that you can come together with, feel connected with, call in a moment's notice, and create that village. And it does take some time, but I feel like once you start putting the feelers out there, you'll really be surprised who will come to your side and be there with a surprise coffee on your front porch or a dinner dropped off when you least expect it but need it most. I think those were the biggest things that personally helped make me feel loved when I was going through a really hard time.
And I think it would be important to add here that postpartum depression, any parent, I mean, that whole idea, as you talked about just, at the beginning of the interview, that there's shame about it's not all great. I mean, it makes it more taboo to talk about, yes, I'm having trouble connecting with my child, or I'm sorry I ever had a child, or that's what I feel, and then suddenly I'll be glad, but it changes from day to day. And so we have this picture of what, pregnancy and early motherhood is going to be like. And it is so diverse for so many people. And for that to be okay, and to be able to be open about it.
Yeah. And I think there's two things here that are really important to note. And one is you don't know how your childhood trauma is going to affect you when you have a child. Because I think, and I notice this a lot in men, especially in my generation, they try really hard to be a better dad and father figure than they had. But then it causes a tremendous amount of stress for them because they've never had it modeled for them. So they get upset with themselves when maybe they're not as patient with their child as they would like to be, but they're really striving hard to be this successful provider for their family. And I think there's a big hole when it comes to supporting new dads or even the second partner in a relationship who necessarily didn't have the baby or isn't the primary caretaker for the baby, but the stress for that other parent. And again, and a lot of times it's men who just haven't had that modeled for them because times are changing, right? About how involved.
Or with gay couples. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be a woman and a man.
Exactly. It could be in same-sex couples as well. And even I've talked to some friends who are in a lesbian relationship and they have children and there's differences. They're both the mom, but the one mom carried the baby and the one mom didn't. And there is different support that's given there where both of them need the same amount of help. So I think we can't forget about the other partner. I think that's really important. But the other thing I wanted to note is when I was pregnant and expecting in my first time, there are pamphlets about breastfeeding and appointments set up with lactation consultants. And, there's what to expect when you're expecting. And there's all of this stuff. There is really no information on what perinatal and postpartum depression feel like and seem like. And for me, I thought that meant wanting to harm my baby. I never knew, because I didn't cry. I didn't have the baby blues. I didn't cry. I had a lovely 2 to 3 month period after I had a baby where I was in this like whimsical la la land. And then it hit me after that. Mm-hmm. So it was a little bit delayed.
Yes.
So so I didn't expect it to be postpartum depression. I thought there was something, I was flawed. Mm-hmm. I was flawed. I was full of rage. It was like, there was something wrong with me for feeling disconnected and not wanting this when I had wanted it my whole life. And as women, we're told our entire lives that motherhood will be the one sole thing in life that fulfills us. And there are so many other things in life that can fulfill us. And we channel all of our energy on being the most perfect mom that we forget about the other things in life that bring us joy. So I really think for expecting parents, there needs to be some better support from the very get-go from when a parent finds out that they're expecting a baby. And then in follow-up afterwards for my second and third child, I already knew that I had struggled with depression. My OBGYN kind of blew it off. My family practitioner, because here in Canada, we have one of each kind of following us along. I remember my family doctor, after I had my second, would call me in every week being like, we just want to make sure the baby's growing properly. She was looking after me.
Oh, good.
She was calling me in because I was in denial. She would call me in every week. We had a standing appointment to check on the baby. And during those appointments, she would try to get as much information about my well-being out of me as she could. Until we formed this really great place in our relationship. And I'm going to cry because I talk about her in my book. I
remember this.
She saved my life. Where she became like a friend to me. And she finally convinced me, because my therapist had convinced me to start antidepressants and I said no, and I didn't go back to her. But my doctor formed this friendship with me where she convinced me to try. And I did. And she saved my life. And then I had a third baby while taking my antidepressants during the pregnancy. And even though that pregnancy was high risk and during COVID, it was one of the best experiences of my life. And I have so many regrets, and that's probably something I should work through therapy, that I didn't have that experience with my two boys because I wasn't in the headspace to be self-aware enough to know what was happening.
Well, I want to thank you for your book and your time. And just in case this is the book, Welcome to the Jungle. And I'm so glad to have you on. And
thank you.
I really thought that there were a lot of jewels in your book. And so thank you for, being so honest and being so transparent.
Thank you for having me.
There was a lot of laughter in that segment, so I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for being here. I'll be back with another SelfWork episode on Friday, and I'll certainly hope you join me. We also have coming up our very first SelfWork Sundays on Instagram Live at 4 o'clock Central Standard Time. That will be again on my Instagram, which is instagram.com/Dr. Margaret Rutherford, 4 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time. SelfWork Sundays. I'll be available to you to answer any questions, and we'll just talk together. I can't wait. Thanks again for being here on this episode. Please take care of yourself, your loved ones, and your community. I'm Dr. Margaret, and this has been SelfWork.